hope that you're doing very well. Today I want to share this little sketchbook oil study that I did recently and talk a bit about my painting approach and especially how I like to simplify my oil paintings. That's something I've worked on for a few years now, and I have some tips that I want to share that might help some of you that are also struggling with getting lost in the details too soon rather than focusing on the bigger picture of the painting. I feel like this was more talked about a few years ago, but it's a big process that I went through, and I think these tips could really help someone. So I will be painting from this reference picture. This is a photo that I took with my phone at a restaurant in France a few weeks ago. It's not edited whatsoever, and I just really like the colors and the light. I think it's very interesting, but there's also a lot of detail in there, which is why I thought this would be an appropriate topic for the video, because my goal here is to really capture the subject without having to reproduce all of those little details and shifts in color in every single element of the piece. I also want to mention that this is a particular stylistic choice that I make within my paintings. I really like this sort of loose, visible brushstroke style, and if that's not your personal style, then that's completely fine, and these tips might not apply to you, but I always think it's interesting to see how other artists approach paintings and why they make certain choices they make. So I am starting with a base sketch. I did a pencil sketch in this case. Sometimes I'll do it directly with oils, but I never try to do both the drawing and the painting at the same time. So start with sketch. It doesn't need to be details, it just needs to mark where the different elements will be on the page. And before we start with the actual painting, I want to explain my approach to the piece, and I've blurred out the reference I'm using to really help you see what I am focusing on better. So at this point, I already have my shapes identified on the page, but what appears more evident by looking at the picture like this are the larger blocks of color within each shape rather than the little variations in each one of them. So basically, I'm starting by filling in these shapes one by one with a more or less uniform color, ideally until the whole page is somewhat covered. Now, as I said, this is my ideal approach, and in reality, I often start by blocking out an area and then I add a little bit of detail and then I move on to blocking out another area. This is something I'm still working on, but each time I move on to a new piece of the painting, I try to make sure I am starting loose and blocking out big shapes, and only after I add a very limited amount of detail and only when necessary. So during this first stage, I like to use bigger brushes, sometimes bigger than the one I'm using here. The bigger ones I had were drying from another painting I did. And then I only switch to small detail brushes at the very end. This makes it harder for me to add detail because obviously with a big brush, it's hard to get in with little shifts of color. So it keeps my attention on the bigger picture a bit more. And on this topic, sometimes I am kind of scared of using big brushes because I think I'm going to like color outside the lines, so to speak, and accidentally like place a color where it shouldn't be. And if you're working with oils, remember that you can just wipe things off if you made a mistake or if something doesn't look the way you want it to. For some reason, I never remember to do this. And same goes for if you find yourself getting distracted and overwork a bit of the painting, you can wipe off that bit where you got carried away and start over. I know that it can be very daunting, but I think that if you painted it once, you can do it again. And I'd rather use that as an opportunity to try again and better my skill rather than just getting stuck with a painting I don't like that I then think I could have fixed. So I am starting with what I feel like are the most important elements. In this case are those cheese pastries in the middle, and then I'm slowly moving towards the elements that won't stand out as much, and finally onto the background. And throughout the painting process, I keep in mind that those first few elements that I started with are the ones that I'm going to detail out more, so I can bring out more attention to them, and everything else can have a pretty minimal amount of detail or none at all, and that is where the eye can rest. Now, painting alla prima, something that I struggle with is getting crisp edges, and I find that the details you add can sometimes get lost and sort of blend with the wet painting that's already on there, which I feel like happened a bit with this painting, especially around the middle area where the little carrot strands are. I feel like that got messed up a bit, but it's fine. That's not the main focal point of the piece, so it doesn't need to be super defined. I'm still adding a bit of detail, but I'm not going in with every single one of those little things that I see in the reference. And then you see at the end that the pastry in front is what I picked to be my focal point, and so that is the one that has the most definition and the most contrast, and I feel like that really helps it stand out more, and that's what the eye is drawn to first. I also think it's quite obvious that I really like leaving my brushstrokes very visible, and I feel like that just adds a lot of character to the painting, and it's something that I like seeing personally. So I'm not blending basically at all. I mix my colors on the palette and I apply them as they are, and I try not to mix them with one another on the page either. I like that sort of blocky effect, and I feel like this adds another element of looseness to the piece, but you have to be careful with this because it can also make your painting look kind of messy and unfinished. So I think it's all about finding a balance between the two. And something else related to color that I wanted to quickly mention that I think helps making a piece more coherent is to keep your shadows and highlights of opposite temperatures. And what I mean by this is, for example, for me, I pretty much always paint cool toned shadows and warmer highlights. You can also switch that around, and I feel like that depends a lot on light. That's what I typically do, but I really feel like that helps pulling a piece together. You could also choose to stick with a limited color palette. I don't consciously do that, but I think oftentimes I pick a few colors that are going to be my main colors, and then everything else is sort of accent colors that are not as present. And I feel like limiting the amount of kind of your main colors can also help to simplify a piece. But anyways, these are the things that help me make sure I don't overcomplicate things with my paintings and kind of keep things loose, keep my focus on the overall look of the piece. And I'm really interested to see actually how these will translate onto some bigger pieces that I plan on working on later in the year. I'm sure you'll get to see those in future videos, but I have some ideas that I'm starting to develop in these days, and I'm probably going to continue work as I'm on holiday. But I definitely need to get some bigger brushes for those because I am going to be painting on big canvases. Also, I'm going to be painting on canvas, which is something I never do. I really hate the texture of canvas because I feel like it just makes everything look blurry and sort of messy in a way that I really don't like. So I'm probably going to do like 5 layers of gesso until the canvas is properly smooth, but I can't really paint on a big size wooden panel. That wouldn't be very practical. It would also be a lot heavier, so I'm gonna have to go for canvas for once, and we'll see what my struggle with those is. And yeah, I'm just interested to see, because the other times that I've tried to work on bigger canvases, I have just always really struggled with keeping my focus on the whole piece, and I get really distracted by working on a certain area, and then everything else just I don't do, or like I don't know what to do with. So that will be very interesting, and I'm hoping these tips that I've picked up along the way are going to help me with that as well. But with that being said, I hope that these can be helpful to you, and I hope you enjoyed watching this painting process. I want to mention quickly before we end the video, because I forgot at the beginning, and I know I'm gonna get this question. The way that I am able to paint with oils in my sketchbook is just by priming the pages with 2 layers of gesso, sometimes 3, and that basically just prevents the oil from getting absorbed into the paper and kind of ruining the paper. So that's just what I do. Nothing else to it. I don't sand it. I actually quite like the texture of gesso, so that's that. But yeah, I wanted to mention that before we end the video, and I wish you all a lovely week. I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I'll see you very soon with a new video. Bye!